Make it fun. A great piece of advice. And those words come from a guy who I first met when we both started in radio in the Fraser Valley. Well, today, Brad McDonald is an author, a much sought-after speaker, and a wise voice for those working in sales in any industry. But before all this, before the Jim Pattison Broadcast Group, Brad worked at a station where he saw firsthand that yes, radio could be a little bit like the TV sitcom WKRP. He's documented many of these stories in his book, Tales of Sales. Let's take a trip down his career path with a few interesting stories along the way. My guest, JBM2 Communications President, Brad McDonald.
Broadcast Chronicles, revealing the most surprising, compelling, and even shocking stories behind some true characters from the other side of the microphone. Here's Bruce Claggett.
Most who love broadcasting think about being behind the mic, and I'm sure Brad McDonald could have excelled if his career went in that direction. But he found early success on the business side, and well, he never looked back. Brad, how did that happen? Did you always want to do sales?
I wanted to be, as a lot of kids growing up, you want to be an athlete or a hockey player or anything like that. My parents said, you know what, it would be good if you got into broadcasting instead, because your odds are maybe a little bit better there. They got more of a chance to be involved as a sportscaster. And growing up here on the West Coast, we're really blessed, as I was a big hockey fan and a big football fan, to have two of the best voices ever. One being Jim Robson, who did the Canucks play-by-play, and Jim Cox, who was the BC Lions play-by-play broadcaster on CKNW 4 years. And then it became JP McConnell when the broadcast rights moved over in 83 to CFUN. And they're just iconic voices in the marketplace that could paint the picture so well. So growing up, I was like, well, maybe I get into broadcasting. So I was kind of interested in the broadcasting and the journalism. And high school, I wrote in the local high school paper. I was an editor there and liked to write stories. And then I evolved into applying to get into BCIT and the broadcast program. The first application I did, I remember I met Brian Anderson, who was the head of the department those days, and I was like 17 and I wasn't ready. I applied and I didn't get in. And but he said, I encourage you to go next year, maybe take some of the night school program courses, which is what I did. So I took Intro to Radio, and I took and at the same time I was going to Douglas College in business and political science courses, because I just had a bit of an interest in those areas. Second application, I was accepted in 1982. I started BCT in the radio program, and 2 years later, I did a co-op in Abbotsford. I kind of decided. I remember one of the staff members maybe suggested that I might want to take a look at the business side and try the sales department. So I met with, in what was then Fraser Valley Broadcasters, I met with Gary Milne and Peter Alpin, and Peter offered me a chance to work in the Abbotsford radio station, or do my co-op in 1983, 84 out there. And I was like the jack of all trades. And God bless Peter Alpin, who is still a friend of mine.
An amazing guy.
He did me the biggest favors ever. He made me do everything. And I remember I was like 1 week in, and I'd met some of the staff. I'd gone on some sales calls with some of the other veteran salespeople. But I remember about my third or fourth day, and I showed up in I had like 2 sets of dress clothes that I rotated every other day, right? And I had a blazer and a tie on, and he shows up and he goes, "Okay, meet me downstairs in the lobby." And I went downstairs to the old lobby on Allwood Street. And he said, "I need you to clean out the promo locker." I said, "Excuse me?" He said, "I need you to clean this out. Like, we had a bunch of old signs and crap." So there I am with a suit and tie, and I'm dirty and dusty and cleaning this all out. And I asked him years later, "Why did you make me do that?" He said, "I want to see what your attitude was like. Were you really wanting it? Did you really, how pliable were you? How willing were you to go the extra mile?" He said, "That was a bit of a character test." He said, "That's why I asked you." He said, "You wouldn't believe how many other people in the past go like, are you serious? Like, I'm here to be on air. I'm here to do this, or write commercials." He said, no, that was a character test. And I always remembered that. That was a very valuable lesson. If I got a little bit snotty or high upon myself, and then I would have probably, I could be folding sweaters at the Gap right now. So
Well, it's a lot of work going into the business side in
yeah,
broadcasting. And
correct.
I've always known that to be successful, it takes a combination, in my take, of hard work,
Yeah,
rejection, knowing how to deal with rejection,
right.
keeping positive, understanding the needs of your client and meeting them,
Yeah,
and being a people person.
right.
Is that true? Because you have been very successful. Peter Alpin will say this, and it's right in your book. He says you've made companies a lot of money over the years. You've made yourself a fair bit too. But it takes a certain skill. Would you say that skill is what has propelled your success?
I think part of it is being willing to learn, being willing to adapt, and be willing to make mistakes and take risks, and also willing to go the extra mile for people, whether it's within the building or outside of the building with your customers. I think those are really the keys, Bruce, that you need to do in any business, is that you must be willing to learn, to adapt, and to go the extra mile.
And you have to know your
Yeah,
medium too.
yeah, and you have to know it inside and out. I remember, friends of mine who worked in the automotive industry, people that own West Coast Auto Group. Ron Jones was the principal, and his son Scott and Michelle. He made them work through every department from the time they were teenagers to now they're the dealer principals. And the reason for that is they were able to deliver parts, they were able to work
Yeah.
reception, they were able to look under the hood of a car, because you have to know from everything that goes into a product, whether it's automotive, broadcasting, tech, anything in the digital media. You need to know exactly what is, quote, under the hood, end quote, to be able to accurately explain to a potential client what it is you're offering and how it could be a benefit to their business.
Back when you started, and this is when I met you, AM radio was a big deal.
Mm-hmm.
We worked with CFER. You worked also with the FM side. Star
Yeah.
FM was brand new at the time. But there was a certain amount of excitement around AM radio, and it was still vibrant. What happened? What changed over the years?
I would say that with AM radio, obviously from a strictly music perspective, and again, I was never in the programming side, but on the music perspective, I mean, people wanted more high quality sound. I also think that the content, AM became sort of the redheaded stepchild of the industry, which was kind of unfair. I mean, there are certain companies like Rogers, which has done a good job with News 1130, now City 1130, and NW with the Chorus Group with CKNW. They've pivoted and made those brands successful. But with AM radio, I just think it just became kind of lost in the shuffle. And also when companies and shareholders became, especially when companies got more and more owned by larger broadcast corporations, that became less of a priority for quality and content and more for bottom line. I think that's really where AM got kind of lost in the shuffle, in my opinion. And also, it just, in some cases, it just didn't adapt to the markets quick enough. So
Along the way, we saw some frequencies just disappear.
right.
You were part of AM 850, being CFER, 600 with the Pattison Group.
Yep.
And in those dying days as a salesperson, did you start to get the feeling that things were changing, shifting? What was the gut? What were people telling you, and how did you interpret that?
The feeling was that it was the AM radio was on its way out. And we had heard that before. There was AM stereo, there was high def radio, that AM was going to be left behind. And I think there'll always be a place for it. It just has to be depending on what the station does in terms of content and product. I think if the product is good, it doesn't matter whether it's on AM or FM. Now, again, music based, you might want to be on FM or HD radio. But again, AM, in terms of content, if the content is good, then you will get you'll get your share of the listeners, as long as it's marketed well and you have some personalities behind it. I think personalities is the key to any broadcasting, is that you need to have people that are entertaining and that people want to listen to.
Right. Now, you went from Fraser Valley Broadcasters, which was a small chain of radio stations. And when I mean small, we had, because I was part of the team, there was Chilliwack as a head office, there was Abbotsford, and a very small office in Hope.
The mighty CKGO Hope.
The mighty CKGO with a morning show.
Yeah.
And it was a certain feeling. I remember that. There was an excitement. There was a vibrancy still around that. And I think part of that somehow disappeared or changed over the years. Certainly fewer people in the business. Maybe that made a difference. What's your take on it?
Well, when we worked at Fraser Valley, it was a locally owned operation with Bob Singleton, Dennis Barkman, Bill Coombs. So it was a bit of a family feel to it. It's hard to explain other than it would be like going from a mom and pop hardware chain that had 3 or 4 local stores with staff in each location, and going to like a big box place like Home Depot. There was just a bit of a family feel to it. Now, to be fair, Pattison in Vancouver operation was really good at cultivating a good culture. They were, in my mind, they were excellent. They did their very best to not make it feel corporate. I mean, part of that was the way that Jimmy Pattison runs his companies. He's
still not publicly traded, which is
huge.
A big deal.
You have one shareholder to answer to, and he works downtown, and he's got a big yacht. He's the guy. And you meet with Jimmy every 3 months, and you sort of say how you're doing. So, and again, shareholders totally different. So, I think in those days at Fraser Valley, Bruce, when in the late '80s and early '90s, until it got sold to Rogers, I mean, it's just had that sense of the staff lived in the community, they worked in the community, they shopped and ate at the restaurants in the community. They're part of the fabric, and I think that's lost now. And I think it's important for companies to try as best they can to try to do that, to be able to be successful, to engage with their customers and to engage with their listeners, especially. So,
and I think that feeling comes across it must come across when you even meet with clients, and you take kind of like a family feeling. You know, they can ask, they're certainly aware of the ownership. They can ask you about it, and you've got answers. I could ask you, hey, Brad, what's Jimmy Pattison like? And you would say, well, first, Bruce, I call him Jim. But you've met him, you talk with him, and he's still hands-on. That is not the case with broadcasting across the country much anymore.
I'm very fortunate that in my 2 stints in radio with 2 different companies, one was Fraser Valley, one was Pattison, is that I never worked for a shareholder-driven company. And again, they all have their strengths and their weaknesses. Private companies have got their strengths and weaknesses in terms of resources. But I think when it's more of a family feeling, the staff tend to go a little bit of an extra mile and tend to feel very invested in the product. And that feeling has kind of been lost over the last 10 years, I think, in general, in the broadcast industry, specifically radio, Bruce, in my mind. But there are smaller companies that are trying their very best to try to build that back up. And I know that a number of the stations that, Bell Media sold off recently in smaller communities in BC, I mean, they're trying to get back to their roots. And I think it's important for radio to stick with their roots. Community, local events, local functions, be visible, be engaged. That's how the industry will continue to stabilize and hopefully thrive again. That plus integration with technology to make it more accessible to the consumers. And that's some of the keys that they have to do in my mind anyway. So,
well, some of those understandings come from what you've done in broadcasting, but also from some of the experiences you've had. You've documented some of this in a book, Tales of Sales, and that's Tales. I like this. The spelling is a little different as TAILS with a picture of your dog. Tell me about that.
Well, The name came. I was having a lunch with my graphic designer. We're looking at how to design the book, and we kicked around a whole bunch of names. And so Daryl's wife Joy just said, "What about? Well, I have a picture of you and your dog out front and call it Tales of Sales." And we were like, "That's it," you know. And truthfully, the picture of a cute looking dog helps. It's like dogs and babies. It helps sells books. Let's be honest.
It does.
It helped. Never mind the ugly guy on the cover. That dog's kind of cute. But yeah, so I have to keep Benny in the lifestyle he's accustomed to now because he helped sell some books for me. So
absolutely. But what were some of the best stories that you can remember that you had to include in that book? Tell me one of them.
Well, one was when I was at Fraser Valley Broadcasters. I had just broken the industry, and I'm trying desperately to get new accounts. And Peter Alpin was so encouraging. But there's 5 reps in what was then a 3 sales rep market. So there wasn't a lot to go around. So I'm running around selling, advertising to farmers, selling hay, and getting an order for $150. But I remember I was talking to. It was a weekday afternoon, and I was talking to Rock Shannon Fraser, who's then the afternoon guy. He was telling me about this restaurant in Matsqui Village called the Hideaway that sold this ridiculously big 12-inch burger that was like 4 pounds of meat, 8 hot dogs, and bacon and cheese. Like it was like something you see on one of those like Heart Attack Grill down in Arizona. And he said, if you eat it, you don't have to pay for it. So I drive down there and I met the owner, Marty, and she was a lovely lady. And it's a diner. It's got 50 seats. And so we started talking, and I said, why don't we do a hamburger eating competition? And we'll have we'll call it the Great Galaxy, which was the nickname of the burger, Great Galaxy Eat Off. So she thought it was a great idea. So she signed a contract right there, and we picked a date, and I ended up going to contacting the media. We had what was then now Omni TV, but was then CKVU came out and did a piece on it. We had the World Belly Flop Champion come out.
Oh, yes.
They had like 12 guys come out to eat this burger, and we're doing a live on location at the time, and we had a prize money, and I remember 2 things. One was the winner was a guy named Rudy. Rudy was. And my mom would charitably say, Rudy was a husky man. And old Rudy, his strategy was to like spit pickles at the other people at different competition. It was just like bizarre. Anyway, Rudy won, and he went inside the restaurant and passed out from overeating. And Rock was doing the remote at the time. And I remember 2 things. One, Rock was like, he said, you got them to sign waivers, right? And I went, what? I'm like 20 years old. Like, what's a waiver? I had no waivers. And I'm thinking, holy cow, that we might be in a lot of trouble here. Anyway, he came to, and we gave him his money and his trophy. And he rode there on a bike because he lived there. And he sort of wobbled down like Matsqui Road back to his home. And anyway, my hostess, the remote hostess, was Bob Singleton's daughter, Lisa, and she was just horrified. So the next day was a Monday, and Bob Singleton comes in, he hauls me to his office and said, we are never, ever, ever doing that. My daughter said she was so embarrassed. I said, Bob, we got the sale, we got the exposure. It was on it was on CKVU, the news the next night. It was Peter Clemente did a thing called Clemente's Clips, and he did this whole feature on it, him trying to eat this burger. And oh my goodness. I mean, it was, in hindsight, we could have gotten to a whole world of financial hurt. And, but
it's got those WKRP turkey vibes.
And again, Atmosphere was like that. It was like a WKRP. Like, I mean, we had all sorts of crazy stuff happen. Like, happen now, like you'd be fired. Or you want to do what? And eat off? I mean, that would, but again, we got the sale. Client was happy. Everybody was happy, except for Bob, who wasn't very happy. And he was, I mean, God bless him. He was a wonderful man. But I remember him looking over my glasses, and he just said, "I am never, ever going to sanction something like this ever again. As long as I am a owner of this place, this is never going to happen. Devin, make myself clear, crystal clear, sir." Right?
I can see Bob saying that. Yes, absolutely.
He was not a happy camper, I'll tell you. I mean, and I mean, Rock and I joked about it for years. He goes, "Did you ever tell him that we had no like liability, like no insurance? We had nothing." Like,
and so many of those things, I remember radio actually happened on a whim, and it was perhaps part of the times, but that's also part of life at that time. And I think there's a connection between maybe just living things out and seeing how things are. And of course, there's planning that goes into even the most off the wall remote or anything like that. But still, that loose kind of fun.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
And I think the broadcast industry, and I understand there's financial limitations and there's things like that are in good taste, but radio needs to do fun things. You need to have the announcer like sleep on top of a car dealership. I don't know. I mean, it's harder to get people to do things these days. I get it. But when radio is best is when it's fun. When
Absolutely.
When it's doing something different out of the box than that was Santana. It's 10:24. Traffic's coming up next. You know, the time and weather checks. They've got to be more fun and more engaging, and then leverage their digital assets, the social media assets to help build that. And one thing, again, I'll also go back to my Pattison days. Yeah, and I'm not on the payroll anymore, and have been for a couple of years. But they were good at doing promotions. They were really good at doing different things. And I know the financial constraints now make it a little bit difficult, but we did stuff. I mean,
well, JR Country was everywhere.
Clay and Karen the morning show were fantastic, and they did goofy stuff. I mean, we did a promotion with a Chrysler dealership in Maple Ridge called the Big Green Thing, which we did around St. Patrick's Day, where we invited listeners. They did the morning show live from what was then Super Dave's Chrysler, and it was from 6 a.m. to 10 a.m. We invited listeners to show up with their biggest green thing. Now, the prize was a green Chrysler Neon. So this is like 2003, 2004. Yeah. And it was the most bizarre cavalcade of human beings I've ever seen in my life show up. We had people with paper chains painted green. We had people with green squash, but we had people with a big semi with green lumber spray painted. But the winner was somebody brought a military grade parachute in. I mean, it was like these people came out of the woodwork to win a car, and it was like that was fun. I mean, that is fun stuff, right? And it was just different. So I think, again, I'll give especially the JR promotions department full credit. They were wonderful at manufacturing different ideas in those days of doing things that were different. And I think if radio does that, if radio does things that are just out of the box and different thinking than just same old, they can engage the community. And again, by leveraging other media assets that they have to get the consumers talking about it, because people don't really talk about radio in Vancouver, really. They don't. It's not top of mind. It's not like 10. And I know times changed and tastes changed. My children and their spouses, we grew up in a radio home. I mean, I used to joke about it. I mean, it's just like we would be driving somewhere and the kids were like, teens. Oh, can we listen to the beat? I would say no, because they're stealing groceries off our table. We will never listen to that radio station. But they grew up in radio homes. Now they're in their late 20s and early 30s. I actually, in preparation for this interview, Bruce, I said, how much radio you guys listen to? And by and large, it's like nominal to zero. And they listen to podcasting like this. They listen to audiobooks. They just don't listen to terrestrial radio. And
so what do we have to do, Brad? You can take a look at this now. You're out of directly being involved in it.
Yeah.
What advice would you have to an owner of a company now that's heavily invested in terrestrial radio stations.
Make your staff available to the consumers. Make it fun. Do different promotions, like do different things. I mean, to give away prizes, it can't be like a 4-pack of tickets to the Cineplex unless it's a really must-demand movie, but you have to have creative ideas that will really get people talking. And that's hard in a real cluttered media environment where everybody is asking for attention. I mean, Edmonton Oilers girl a couple of weeks ago was everywhere, right?
Yeah.
And, the Hawk Tua thing that's happening right now, which we don't want to get into, but why? Like again, but it dominates. And again, if radio can find opportunities that are legal and appropriate, won't get people in trouble, to be able to get some sort of, people talking about it. Remember when Zed came back on air, Z95, they did Zed effects, and people were actually talking about that. I mean, probably that was one of the last times I remember people were talking about on social media. Did you get the clue for Zed effects? Like, people were talking about that.
Yeah.
That was several years ago. Since then, and again, COVID came along and people's priorities shifted a little bit, but in terms of engagement is huge. Be out of the box, do crazy promotions. I mean, I'm not talking about the WKRP dropping, turkeys, which is, still fantastic. But again, heck, do a hamburger eat-off. I remember at Pattison, this is over 20 years ago, at Red Robin Restaurants, we did a promotion where people had to put their hand on a Volkswagen Bug, and it was like a contest, like whoever could do it like without taking their hand off it would win the car. And so we did that in the parking lot of the Guildford location. Did a live broadcast from there, and it was fun. People showed up for it. The Big Green thing.
These are fun. They really are. Hey, what's in the future for Brad? Because you still have so much life and so much career ahead of you. Don't tell me you're going to retire. You've got your business going now. What do you plan to do in the next few years?
I think I've been doing some sales consulting with 2 or 3 different companies. I've done some speaking at sales conferences for RBC, Budget Blinds, a couple of companies like that. So I've had the chance to share. So I'd like to do a little bit more of that. And also, I'm thinking about writing a second book. I'm just sort of like noodling that around a little bit, and thinking about what other knowledge I can pour out of my skull into the world, which is a scary thought for some people, apparently.
Oh, yes. And his book is Tales of Sales. Brad McDonald's next book, well, we await more insights, some stories, and even some inspiration.
Broadcast Chronicles is written and hosted by Bruce Claggett. Music, Follow Your Heart via Upbeat. Graphic design, Creative Shovel. I'm Sarah McKenzie. Subscribe to Broadcast Chronicles wherever you download your favorite podcasts. This has been a BFC Communications production.